So many of our students and many of us have probably found that some of the most profound ahas or awakening experiences happen either perhaps at an intensive retreat or maybe in those moments of life when we're accompanying someone when they're passing away or witnessing a birth, some of the more intensive times. And what I'd like to do is take a portion of time right now to explore how we also can guide ourselves and others right in the midst of daily life. And I think about it often because so generically, when you hear the stories of realization, they sound far off and mystical, like as in it happened either 2,500 years ago, or it's off during a 3-month retreat, or it only happens in a monastery. And for, of course, centuries it was men, only happened to men. And so it's like it gets to be narrow and narrower, a sense that profound realization's not necessarily something that's available to the householder. And yet there's a really radical truth that when we sense that possibility, that is the transmission, that possibility that you can wake up in a profound way to a sense of aliveness and light and spirit. You can sense the awareness and love that's here, and then you don't have to wait. I'm thinking of one of the mythic stories that always touched me, of this musk deer that traveled the entire world across these raging rivers and mounted the highest cliffs and just covered miles and miles of area without, and what it was doing was chasing this elusive scent that this was what it wanted more than anything. And at the end of its life, as it lay dying, its horns pierced its own belly, and as this deer passed away, realized the scent had been emanating from its own being. And so it is that what we long for is who we are. And those can sound like words until there's really that sense of we don't have to wait, and it is right here, and it's not outside us. So in a sense, that's what the possibility is to communicate. And I find it really valuable. There's a phrase I've always loved. It's called the big squeeze, which is our predicament that deep down we know that. We know that in the background there is this awareness, this loving awareness that when we get quiet and the space between the thoughts, there really is a sense of it filling our experience. And every day there's a forgetting. And think of today. Every day we go inside the stories about who we are and how we should be, and often the gap between that. And every day we get into the stories of the limiting beliefs about, what's really keeping us away from what matters, how we get stuck. We live in those stories. The doctor's a psychiatrist, the patient's a dog lying on the couch, and the doctor's saying, "So when did you start seeing the invisible fence?" So we have these stories about what's keeping our life contained, and as it said, one friend wrote this book and she said, it's not our conditioning, it's society's conditioning. We are living in all sorts of beliefs and ideas of what makes us to be a successful person, a good person, a bad person. It's as one man described his life growing up in Texas. He said, it taught me two things. One is that God loves you and you're going to burn in hell. And the other is that sex is the most awful, filthy thing on earth and you should save it for someone you love. So the suffering of the big squeeze is that something in the background, our wisdom knows, this possibility of living without holding back our love, of really living fully and living from who we can be. We intuit that, and every day there's a forgetting, and we get more petty. We live in a smaller place. And so that's the trance that we're in. And I often think of that palliative caregiver who described the greatest regret of the dying as being, I didn't live true to myself. That in a way I forgot who I was and lived according to something smaller. This is from Bruce Holland Rogers. When he was very young, he waved his arms, gnashed the teeth of his massive jaws, and tromped around the house so that dishes trembled in the china cabinet. Oh, for goodness sake, his mother said, you're not a dinosaur, you're a human being. Well, since he was not a dinosaur, he thought for a time he might be a pirate. Seriously, his father said at some point, what do you want to be? A fireman then, or a policeman, or a soldier, some kind of hero? But in high school, they gave him tests and told him he was very good with numbers. Perhaps he'd like to be a math teacher. That was respectable. Or a tax accountant. He could make a lot of money doing that. It seemed a good idea to make money, what with falling in love and thinking about raising a family. So he was a tax accountant, even though he sometimes regretted that it made him, well, small. And he felt even smaller when he was no longer a tax accountant, but a retired tax accountant. Still worse, a retired tax accountant who forgot things. He forgot to take the garbage to the curb, forgot to take his pill, forgot to turn his hearing aid back on. Every day it seemed he had forgotten more things, important things like which of his children lived in San Francisco and which were married or divorced. Then one day, when he was out for a walk by the lake, he forgot what his mother had told him. He forgot that he was not a dinosaur. He stood blinking his dinosaur eyes in the bright sunlight, feeling the familiar warmth on his dinosaur skin, watching dragonflies flitting among the horsetails at the water's edge. I love reading that one because what it does for me is just sensing how it can be so much of a dream, this life we go through, and the living according to the expectations in our life, and what does it take to really pause and listen in a way that allows us to live from a deeper truth, from really a bigger reality. And so what we practice and what we teach others is ways of waking up out of that trance, of challenging the beliefs and coming into our body. And we teach the real powerful, and to me this is so critical to break through the trance, really being willing to feel the vulnerability that's there. And so when we do these practices, and we together as a group, we all practiced rain together, it was that sequence of, okay, so we sense a stuck place where we get caught in a trance of in some way believing that who we are is small or deficient or not okay. And then we practice these ways of contacting and feeling what's there and bringing kindness and sensing a softening and an opening. And one of the key places that when we teach really helps people to realize that they're not who other people might have said they were is in those moments we sometimes call after the rain, where there's been that compassionate presence and we sense, oh, that presence, that's more the truth of who I am than any of those stories. And one of the key things I want to mention now, and we're going to be practicing together, is that if we want to help people to really trust that presence, there needs to be what the Tibetans call many glimpses a day. And what that means is that rain is not a one-shot, but rather, we do that practice and we bring some kindness and we sense a shift, but then there's that inquiry of really who's here now, and a resting back in it, and a getting familiar with over and over. For myself, when I get stuck and I go through the day and I do little mini light rains. And by the way, rain is really just bringing these qualities of noticing what's happening, mindfulness, and care to the moment. It's useful to have a set of steps to help us remember, but it can be a very spontaneous, just a noticing and a softening. Meet your edge and soften. And for myself, as I go through the day, and there's times I feel that stuckness, and in some way there's a noticing it and a softening, there's also in that softening a sense of the, who's here now? Oh, this, rest in this, getting familiar. When it's really sticky, for me, there's a sense that I am taking all this conditioning that's unpleasant or difficult, and in some way, there's a kind of, I'm offering that into this loving presence that is holding everything, and then in those moments, there's a becoming that loving presence. It's including it all. And I slow down there and notice, this is it. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that the many glimpses starts getting us familiar, so it really becomes more familiar than the story we're used to running about ourselves.